Why are you calling the police on a child? The words echoed through the first-class cabin, slicing through the tension like a knife. Everyone turned. The boy trembled, and the man in the tailored suit stepped forward. Jamal's small fingers tightened around his Game Boy as he peeked beyond the curtain separating first class from the cockpit corridor. The door was slightly ajar, just enough for a curious 12-year-old to catch a glimpse of flashing lights and complex buttons. It wasn't mischief. It wasn't rebellion. It was wonder. The flight had been delayed an hour already, and passengers were still boarding. Jamal's father had stepped away to take a phone call, leaving him in their first-class seats. The boy, tall for his age but visibly young, stood to stretch and wandered just a few feet ahead. That's when the pilot turned around. "Hey, step back. That's restricted," barked Captain Whitman, a tall, broad-shouldered white man in his mid-50s. Startled, Jamal froze. I wasn't going in. I just wanted to see." But Captain Whitman didn't wait. With a hand to his earpiece, he muttered, "Security breach. Minor. Black male child, about 12. Get someone here." The flight attendant nearby, a younger woman with a nervous smile, stepped forward. "Captain, he's just a kid. Maybe we can just," I said, "get security." Passengers in nearby seats were already turning. Jamal backed away, eyes wide. One woman muttered, "Typical," under her breath. Another pulled out her phone. Within minutes, 2 airport police officers boarded. Jamal's lower lip quivered as they approached. "I didn't do anything," he whispered, but the pilot pointed firmly. He was trying to enter the cockpit. Then came the voice, deep, calm, unmistakably authoritative. "Is this how we treat children now?" All heads turned. Walking down the aisle was a tall black man in his 40s, impeccably dressed in a dark blue suit, with an FAA lapel pin gleaming on his chest. He moved with precision, like someone used to being watched and obeyed. "Dad." Jamal's voice cracked. Captain Whitman straightened, suddenly unsure. The man extended his hand. "Richard Evans. And you just made a very, very big mistake." The cabin was still. Every eye locked on Richard Evans. One of the officers stepped forward, unsure of what he was walking into. "Sir, this is just a routine." "No, officer," Richard interrupted, his voice even but unmistakably firm. "This is not routine. You were called for a child who peeked into an open cockpit door, a door that should have been secured. Instead, you're now standing here treating him like a criminal." The captain shifted uneasily behind the officers. "He was in a restricted area?" "No, he wasn't," Richard replied without looking at him. "He stood outside the cockpit. You left the door ajar. That's a security violation." Richard's gaze finally turned to the captain. "You escalated a non-threat because of your own assumptions. Let's not pretend this isn't about what he looks like." The words dropped like thunder. The officers looked at each other, unsure how to proceed. Richard gently turned to Jamal. "You okay, son?" Jamal nodded but clung to his father's coat. "I just wanted to see the buttons." Richard's face softened, but his jaw tightened again as he turned back. "You called in police on a child. Do you know how many kids die every year because someone overreacts to their skin color?" The captain opened his mouth but said nothing. "I'm filing a formal complaint," Richard said. "And I want the crew grounded until the FAA investigation team arrives." Immediately, the flight attendant from earlier, Maria, stepped forward hesitantly. "Sir, I tried to stop him. I said he was just a kid." Richard looked at her. "I appreciate that. You're the only one who showed judgment." She lowered her eyes, conflicted. The captain barked, "This is still my flight, and I'll make decisions for my aircraft." "Not anymore," Richard said calmly, pulling out his phone and making a quick call. "Yes, it's Evans. Flight 733, Gate B9. I need 2 FAA supervisors and a federal air marshal, stat. We have a potential misconduct escalation." He hung up. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, passengers started to murmur. "He's right," someone whispered. "Poor kid." Another said, and an older woman stood up. "You should be ashamed of yourself," she said to the captain. Richard turned to the police. "You're dismissed." "Thank you." The senior officer gave a slight nod, then motioned to his partner, and they left quietly. The cabin remained still. Jamal sat down again. This time next to his father. He looked up. "Dad, why do people think I'm bad?" Richard exhaled deeply. "Because they don't see you, son. They see a story someone else told them. And it's our job to make sure they learn the real one." Jamal looked confused, but he nodded. Maria returned with a warm towel and some water, kneeling beside Jamal. "I'm sorry you were scared," she said gently. "Thanks," Jamal said quietly. Then a uniformed agent arrived, a woman with a badge clipped to her chest. "FAA Investigation Division. Mr. Evans, we're here to take your statement." Richard stood. "Let's get this done right." The captain was let off the plane, expression blank. And Jamal? For the first time in that whole ordeal, he smiled, just a little, because his dad had turned fear into justice. By the time Captain Whitman stepped off the aircraft, 2 FAA supervisors had arrived at the gate, accompanied by a federal air marshal. Word had traveled fast, not just among staff, but online. Someone had uploaded a 30-second video from the cabin. In it, Jamal was seen standing near the cockpit door. The captain's aggressive tone, the call for police, and the entrance of Richard Evans. All of it was there. And it was going viral. Inside the plane, the FAA investigator, Agent Monica Reyes, continued calmly taking notes. "Mr. Evans," she said, "we're recording all statements for internal documentation and potential federal review. Can you describe what happened from your perspective?" Richard stood tall. "Yes. My son stood near the cockpit door, which was left ajar. He didn't cross the threshold." The captain escalated needlessly, citing restricted access and called police on a child. He never once attempted to assess the situation calmly or professionally. "And your role?" she asked, notepad poised. "I am the acting administrator of the FAA," Richard said simply. The other passengers stirred again. A middle-aged woman with glasses leaned over to whisper. I knew he looked familiar. Monica's eyes widened subtly, though her voice remained professional. "Thank you, sir." Jamal, now calmer, clutched a half-empty apple juice box as he watched his father speak. Maria, the flight attendant, sat beside him, occasionally patting his shoulder gently. "I'd like to provide my own statement," Maria said, raising her hand. Monica nodded. "Please." Maria recounted everything. The look on the captain's face, the way Jamal was immediately profiled, and her own unsuccessful attempt to intervene. "It wasn't about safety," she said firmly. "It was about race." Richard turned slightly to her, his eyes expressing gratitude. Just then, the air marshal stepped forward. "Sir, I've reviewed the security footage from the jet bridge and the forward camera inside the cabin. The child never touched the cockpit door or crossed the line. The video supports your account." Monica scribbled a few notes, then looked at the rest of the passengers. "Anyone else want to give a statement?" Hands shot up. One man stood. "I'm a retired teacher." That kid was polite and curious. The captain escalated over nothing. Another woman. "This is why people don't trust authority. That boy could have been traumatized forever." Then a younger passenger spoke up, holding her phone. "This is already on TikTok. It has 400,000 views." Monica's pen paused. "Excuse me." The girl nodded. "Hashtags are already trending. Hashtag flying while black. Hashtag pilot bias. Hashtag justice for Jamal." Richard let out a slow breath. The moment had escaped the walls of that plane. Monica tucked her notes away. "FAA will conduct a formal investigation. The pilot has been temporarily suspended pending the results. I'll personally ensure this report is escalated to the Ethics Committee." She stood, turning to Richard. "I'm sorry this happened to your son. And thank you for handling it with grace." Richard nodded. "This isn't just about my son. It's about every child who's ever been made to feel like a threat before they've even spoken." He looked down at Jamal, whose eyes were wide but clear. "Come on, buddy. Let's get off this plane." As they walked down the aisle, passengers began to clap, soft at first, then louder, not for spectacle, but for justice. And outside, the news trucks had already started lining up. The footage was everywhere: morning shows, evening news, social media reels. It all carried the same narrative. A black child nearly arrested for being curious, saved by a father with power, poise, and presence. Richard Evans had never intended to be in front of cameras. As acting administrator of the FAA, he worked behind the scenes, crafting policy, reviewing safety protocols, improving standards. But this time, silence would have meant complicity. He stood at the podium in Washington, D.C., surrounded by microphones from every major network. Behind him, a banner read, "Systemic Accountability in Aviation. Hashtag flying while black. Hashtag pilot bias. Hashtag justice for Jamal." "My son," Richard began, "is 12 years old. He loves airplanes, simulations, and dreams of flying one day. He paused, letting the cameras roll. But last week, his dreams were interrupted, not by turbulence or mechanical failure, but by judgment. He looked directly into the lens. What happened on Flight 733 wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a reflection of a deeper, systemic flaw in our perception of threat, one that too often sees black children as dangerous before they're even seen as human. The room was silent. Richard continued, "We can't train pilots to fly through storms, yet leave them untrained in how to navigate bias. We owe passengers, and especially children, better." The questions afterward came quickly. Will the FAA be launching a wider review of racial bias in training? Yes, he answered. Effective immediately. Is the pilot from Flight 733 still flying? No. He has been grounded pending a formal ethics review. Was this a one-off event? He hesitated, then said, "Ask any black parent." The answer is no. Outside, Jamal watched the press conference from a secure office. Maria, the flight attendant who had spoken up, sat beside him. "You okay?" she asked gently. Jamal nodded. "He's like a superhero." Maria smiled. "He kind of is." Meanwhile, the airline issued a statement. "We sincerely apologize for the incident aboard Flight 733. We take all allegations of racial profiling seriously and are cooperating with the FAA in their investigation." But public reaction was swift and brutal. "Too little, too late," read one tweet. "They only care because he's FAA," read another. "This could have been my son," a mother posted with a photo of her own child. Within 48 hours, 3 major sponsors pulled ad placements with the airline. Stock prices dropped 3.8%. Behind closed doors, the airline's board scrambled. In another room, Richard sat in a private meeting with FAA board members and civil rights advocates. "We need more than apologies," said one activist. "We need reform." Richard nodded. "I agree. And I'm prepared to pilot that reform myself." A new initiative was drafted, Project Clear, Cultural Literacy, Equity, and Anti-Racism in Aviation. It would become mandatory for all commercial airline personnel, including pilots, to undergo immersive training in implicit bias and passenger equity. That Richard's message was simple. Accountability isn't punishment. It's prevention. But for Jamal, the reality was more personal. That evening, while walking through a quiet park with his dad, he asked, "Will they be mad at you?" "Who?" "The pilot." "The airline." Richard smiled. "Maybe, but I'm not here to make them comfortable. I'm here to make sure you're safe." Jamal looked down. "Do I still get to be a pilot one day?" His dad stopped walking but he knelt, eye level with his son. "Not only do you get to be a pilot, Jamal, you're going to be a better one than all of them. Because you'll fly with your eyes open, and your heart open, too." Behind the polished glass doors of the Skirich Airlines executive boardroom, 3 men sat in grim silence. The document on the table in front of them was simple, but its consequences were enormous. "Terminate pilot." PEO Thomas Rollins stared at it with a clenched jaw. "This decision has the power to either steady this company or sink it." To his right, CFO Gerald Watkins added, "Social media backlash is still growing. We lost $312 million in market cap in 48 hours. If we don't act fast, it's going to get worse." "And if we terminate him without due process?" asked Andrew Lee, chief legal officer. "Unions will scream. Pilots will threaten walkouts. We'll be accused of caving to pressure." Thomas closed his eyes. "This isn't just about pressure. The FAA is breathing down our necks. Richard Evans has already launched an ethics investigation. You know what that means. They did that if the FAA found Skirich negligent in its pilot training or disciplinary process, it could recommend fines, licensing reviews, even flight operation suspensions." Gerald leaned forward. "Then what's the play?" Thomas took a deep breath. "We offer the pilot early retirement. Quietly. Full benefits. NDA. He's gone, but not fired." Andrew shook his head. "That won't fly. The public wants blood, Tom. They want justice. And Evans will see right through a golden parachute." A tense silence fell again. Finally, Thomas said, "Then we do it by the book. Official termination. We cite breach of passenger safety protocol and bias-motivated escalation." Gerald raised an eyebrow. "We've never used that language before. We have to start somewhere." Meanwhile, in his modest home in suburban Ohio, Captain Whitman sat alone that he stared at his TV, where a news anchor discussed the unraveling of a respected career. His photo flashed across the screen, pilot cap and all. Beneath it, removed from duty after racial incident. He picked up his phone. 10 missed calls. 3 from his wife. None from the airline. He didn't need to wait for the official letter. He knew what was coming. I was just doing my job, he muttered to himself. But even he didn't believe that anymore. Back in Washington, Richard Evans received the message he'd been waiting for. Skirich Airlines confirms termination of Captain Whitman. Training reforms under review. He stared at the screen quietly, then forwarded it to Jamal's school email address with a short note. You were right to be curious. Never let fear take that from you. Later that evening, Richard received a call from Maria, the flight attendant. They're asking me to speak at the training sessions, she said. To talk about what happened. To teach empathy. Richard smiled. You're exactly who they should be learning from. I was just doing what was right. And that, he said, is how change begins. But not everyone was celebrating. Online, a new wave of voices surged forward. Pilots are under attack. Political correctness is destroying aviation. Next, they'll fire us for looking at someone the wrong way. A union spokesperson made a vague statement about defending due process. But the tide had already turned, because for every angry comment, there were 10 more from parents saying thank you. From teachers sharing Jamal's story. From children drawing pictures of airplanes with captions like, I want to be brave like Jamal's dad. And in the heart of all that noise, something rare was taking shape. Accountability, real, measurable, and long overdue. 3 weeks after the incident, Jamal stood inside the FAA Youth Aviation Center, dressed in a crisp white pilot shirt, gold stripes on the shoulders, and a black cap just a little too big for his head. Through the panoramic glass windows, he gazed at the massive Boeing 787 on the tarmac, eyes wide with wonder. Do I get to go inside today? He asked. His guide, a smiling program officer, nodded. Not only that, you're going to sit in the captain's seat. Behind them, Richard watched quietly. It was the first time he had seen his son truly light up since that awful day. The trauma hadn't disappeared overnight, but this was healing. Thank you for coming, said a blonde woman approaching him. We're honored to have Jamal as part of our inaugural Future Flyers initiative. Richard extended his hand. Thank you for creating it. This matters more than you know. The Future Flyers program had been born in the wake of the controversy, designed to bring underrepresented youth into direct contact with aviation training, mentorship, and opportunity. And Jamal, by sheer consequence and courage, had become its face. As Jamal climbed into the flight simulator, his hands trembled with excitement. An instructor beside him began guiding him through the buttons. This one manages flaps. That's your throttle. And that, the instructor smiled, is the sky calling you. Jamal grinned. I think I'm ready. Later, in a quiet hallway, Richard answered a call from a national education nonprofit. We'd like you to keynote our next summit, the woman said. Your message about fatherhood, justice, and reform. People need to hear it. He hesitated. I'm not a speaker. You weren't a public figure either. Until the world watched you protect your son. Richard hung up with a slow nod. Something had shifted inside him. For years, his work had focused on regulations and systems. But now he realized change wasn't just about policy. It was about visibility, about being seen, and making others feel seen. That he sat down on a bench just outside the training room and watched Jamal's silhouette through the glass, his son turning knobs, laughing, flying. Richard's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Maria. I just gave my first training session. 72 flight staff attended. Some cried. One hugged me. We're really doing this. He smiled. That evening, back at home, Jamal came running down the stairs with his pilot shirt still on. Dad, can we visit again next week? Richard leaned back in his chair. I think they'd be lucky to have you. Jamal flopped onto the couch beside him, staring at the ceiling. I used to be scared of planes after, Richard turned to him. And now? Jamal looked at his hands. Now I think planes are lucky to have people like me. The word struck something deep in Richard. Yes. Planes. Companies. The whole country. They were lucky to have kids like Jamal, so long as the world made space for them. The auditorium was packed. Leaders from across the aviation industry, pilots, airline executives, regulators, union representatives, and student pilots, filled every row. On the stage, beneath a massive banner that read, "Diversity in Aviation, Fly Without Fear," Richard Evans stood at the podium. Cameras rolled. Reporters jotted notes. And standing proudly behind him in a miniature pilot's uniform was the boy who had changed everything. Jamal. Richard took a slow breath, then began. When I was a child, I believed flight was the most powerful metaphor we had. It meant freedom, possibility, distance overcome. But when you're a child of color, even that metaphor can be interrupted by fear. He glanced at Jamal, who smiled up at him with quiet confidence. 3 months ago, my son was treated like a threat because of his skin color, not his actions. Today, he stands here, not as a victim, but as a symbol of how high we can fly when bias no longer grounds us. Applause rang through the hall. Richard continued. We've launched Project Clear, retraining thousands of flight crews. We've created the Future Flyers Initiative, which is now expanding to 10 cities nationwide. And today, I'm proud to announce that Jamal has been named the National Youth Ambassador for Aviation Inclusion. Jamal stepped forward to a thunderous standing ovation. A spotlight hit his beaming face as he shook hands with the program's director, who handed him a certificate and a pair of engraved wings. He didn't speak into the mic. He wasn't ready for that yet, but he leaned toward his father and whispered, "Thank you for helping me be brave." Richard blinked back tears and nodded. "No, thank you for showing us what courage really looks like." After the ceremony, reporters swarmed the hallway. "Mr. Evans, any future political plans? Will the FAA officially name the new inclusion directive after your son?" But Richard deflected with humility. "This isn't about me. This is about creating skies where every child, every family, feels safe to fly, regardless of who they are or where they come from." Later, on the tarmac outside, Jamal got one final surprise. An instructor opened the hatch of a gleaming flight simulator and waved Jamal over. On the side of the aircraft shell, someone had painted the words, "The Sky, Unshaken," in honor of Jamal Evans. Jamal ran his fingers over the letters. "Is this real?" The instructor grinned. "It's yours to fly." As he stepped inside, Richard stayed back, taking it all in. The pain of that day on Flight 733 could never be erased. But something bigger had taken off since then. A movement, a message, and a boy who would one day fly not just planes, but past every limitation placed upon him. And above them all, the sky waited, unshaken.